Here, we'd like to go back and talk about, recap some of the incidences that happened on your way from North Africa on through France. And I'd like to start with close calls in North Africa.
Yeah. Well, in North Africa, when we landed at Licata, Sicily,
Yes.
our LST got grounded on a sandbar and it couldn't get off. In fact, it was the only one that day that got grounded like it was. And the Jerrys would come over every few minutes and they'd strafe the decks, and we had a lot of casualties on that. I remember the Colonel, General Bennett told me when I visited him here that he remembered that particular LST was the only ones that 62nd had casualties on. Yeah, we just happened to be on that LST. 379 it was, I remember the number. And when the Jerrys would come over the cliff, they would be right on you before you even knew it. And they were straight in the daylight. So we had a lot of casualties that day. And I remember one in particular, young kid. There's Ray and I, we were, Ray Zuber, a friend of mine, we were supposed to sterilize the instruments for Captain Smith, who was the surgeon aboard the ship. And we went down there one time to drop the little thing off, but they were shaped just like a banana, you know, them little things that they put instruments in. And we handed it to them as we were going in. Yeah, they're bringing this kid in, he was a Mexican boy, and he was screaming his head off, "Don't cut my leg off, don't cut my leg off." But the captain looked at him and said, "Son, your leg is off. All it's hanging is the skin, and we do have to take it off." And he was screaming his head off. I always remember that, because Ray and I just went back upstairs with the bloody mess that he handed us and sterilized them. And that's all we did while we were stranded on that bar. Then they let everybody off but the medics. The medics stayed down and take care of the wounded.
Would you speak about the friendly fire with our paratroopers?
Yes, during the invasion, our airborne troops dropped, and they thought it was Germans escaping. That's what they thought, but they didn't know it was our boys, and they fired on them. And I can't honestly say how many lives were lost, but a lot of them. They shot them on the way down.
Well, you talked about D-Day for Sicily.
Well, when we say D-Day for Sicily,
Yeah.
we landed on the D-Day hour. We were the initial troops in on the assault of Licata. Licata, Sicily was the name of the place. Yeah.
So there was more than one D-Day, not just on Omaha Beach, but also Sicily and...
Well, I don't know if you'd call them a D-Day.
Okay.
We were on the first wave assault
Okay.
for the invasion of Sicily.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. They use the term D-Day mostly for Omaha.
Okay. So more correctly, the day of
Omaha,
invasion.
Utah, you know.
As you were going through France, you had an incident about egg stealing. Could you tell us
Yes.
about that?
Well, Ray and I, we decided we'd like to have some fresh eggs, so we heard these chickens clucking and that, so we went in the hen house and we got, I think 3 eggs is what we got. And as we got outside, they started screaming at us and making a lot of noise, and we didn't want Captain Hazeltine or any of the officers to hear it, so we were prepared. We had sea rations, we had chocolate candy bars, we had cigarettes. They quieted right down. They were very satisfied with them. But when we started to pump that stove up for the eggs, we got in a debate. Who's going to get the third egg? Just about that time, a shot rang out and got him right in the crotch. And he hollered to me, "Go get a medic, go get a medic." So I got a medic, and he came over and he put a tourniquet on. And as he was going away, he said, "Willie, take my bedroll." and take my 45 and keep it in the half track, because I had to take his place while he was gone, you know. So I did, and he said, before he left, he looked at me, he says, don't forget we're going to Paris together. Because they were picking guys out when you got a rest for a few days. They'd pick guys out and give them a couple days. So when they picked the 2 names for headquarters, him and I were picked. And that's how we got to go to Paris together. And Paris, we had an escapade. Is this on about the... we were going from bar to bar, and we happened to go in this one, and this was loaded with all combat troops. You had airborne, you had the paratroopers, the rangers, the infantry, you name them. And my buddy walks in there and he says, I can lick anybody in this place. Boy, I took off. I run out the door, and I run down the street, and he come down a little while later. He's walking down towards me, and he looks at me, he says, Willie, where did you go? I said, well, you told everybody in there you could lick anybody, and I knew I couldn't, so I took off. I never forgot that. Oh, Ray, he never forgave me for it either.
Tell us about the French freedom fighters, unsung heroes.
Yeah. We had them with us one time, and we were glad to get rid of them because they took chances that other people wouldn't take. They were very daring and very brave, and a lot of hatred in their heart for German, even people. Didn't matter whether they're a soldier or not. They had that hatred there, and we were with them 2 or 3 different times, and they never spared. If you got a prisoner, they would take them and shoot them. Yeah, they just didn't spare lives. They had deep hatred. They were very brave people. And we saw one lady, a woman, she was tough. Had to be to go through what she did.
You had an experience with French women as collaborators with the
Germans. We were going through, and I can't even remember the town that we went through, but up on the balcony was, I don't know, 4, 5, 6, and they had taken all their clothes off them. They shaved all the hair on their head and on parts of their body. They had them out there on display because they had collaborated with the Germans. And this was all the Free French doing, you know. They're the ones that did those things because when they got a hold of these French girls that collaborated, they knew how to deal with them.
Tell us about the Belgian farmer that you encountered.
Oh, the fellow oh yeah. Well, everybody's looking for a place, a warm place. We were back in the lines, and we had some rest period because the infantry, they had pulled them back for replacements and that. So we got a rest, and this little fellow, he was a little short guy, and always remember he was very kind, and he invited me into his home because everybody went around knocking on doors to find out if we could get a place to sleep in for the night because the town hadn't been hit at all. The town, the Germans were retreating fast, and he takes me up to this little room, and he brings me a pitcher of hot water to wash up with, and he opens the bed up for me, and he says, come on. So I went with him downstairs. We went in the cellar. He had a whole row of barrels there and bottles of wine and that, and we were drinking, and all of a sudden he says to me, come here, and he pointed down, and you can, I don't know what he was pointing at, I had no idea, and pulled his pant leg up, he pulls his stiletto out, and he says, he had killed a German they took down in the cellar, oh, don't fool with the FFI, boy, they were brave people, I'll tell you. They don't get enough credit.
And finally, tell us about your experience with the Russians in Czechoslovakia.
Well, after we got into Czechoslovakia, the Elbe River separated us from the Russians. We were on one side, they were on the other. And on our side was rows of chicken houses, a lot of chickens there. And they used to come over and they'd go in the hen house, steal the chickens, they'd go in the house and take blankets and for anything they wanted. And one time we had a little confrontation. I don't know who he was, some German officer came over with a few of his men and he wanted to go by our embarkation line. See, there was an embarkation line. We didn't cross theirs, they don't cross ours. And the war's over.
Okay.
So he wanted to go through to go to the hen houses, and Colonel Bennett says to him, no, he says, you can't pass by this line. He says, if you do, we're going to fire. So everybody's looking at one another, the war's over. You know, this is not a time for this thing, but he retreated. And the next day, Colonel Bennett got in a Piper Club with one of our men that flew Piper Cubs. They were forward observers, you know, they'd fly, they were very brave guys flying those little Piper Cubs because there was no protection. He flew him over a village, and the Russians had called all the people together in the square to give them their orders. When they got them there, they just massacred them. Don said, General Bennett said, when they flew over, they could hear the rat-tat-tat down there, you know, they were just killing them. That's what they did. They were like animals. The Russians were heartless.
And you had an experience in Pilsen also, didn't you?
Oh, at the Pilsen Brewery.
Yeah.
Well, we borrowed a Jeep and went there one night to pick up some beer, and when we backed up to the dock, they had a Russian walking up and down, and he had a submachine gun on his back. And we had no weapons with us at all, so Sandro Bly got out of the Jeep, and he walks up on the deck, and he talks to this the Czech, and he wants to know if we can get some beer. And the Czech says, no, he says, the Russians have bought it all. And old Sandro says to him, no, they don't buy nothing, they steal everything. So anyway, we kept saying to Sandro, come on, we want to get out of there. And that was the end of that. We drove back with nothing.
Anything else you want to mention?
Yeah, it was kind of scary.
Harold, what about your post-war contact with General Bennett, or Colonel Bennett, as you remembered him? Then it seems to me you found out that he was at West Point.
Yeah, somebody from my outfit wrote, and they said, Willie, you ought to go down to West Point. Our old top kick Bennett's down there. That's the way he put it. So I wrote a letter down to Colonel Donald V. Bennett, and I said, I would like to come and see you, bring my son down. I've never been to West Point myself. So a few days later, I'm sorting mail in the post office, and here's this official letter, and up in the left corner is General Donald V. Bennett. And oh boy, and first thing I thought of, holy smokes, I wrote Colonel. So I opened it up, and he says, Willie, you get down here. He says, I'm going to straighten you out. He says, you're going to find out who I am. So it was all in fun. And so Dave and I went down, and as we drove in, there was this big limousine with the stars on the side of the door and the flags on the fenders and that. And these two young men get out and they walk over to David and I, and says, I presume you're Mr. Williams and your son David. I said, yeah, my name's Harold Williams. This is my son David. He says, well, jump in. He says, we're going to take you up to meet the general. So I, okay, and they stand there saluting us, and I said, you don't have to salute me, I'm not in the service anymore. He looked at me, yes we do. He said, we were given orders by the general to salute you. So I said, well, okay, it's all right. So we went up, they let us off, and we walked in. This young girl, she was the secretary, says, I expect you're Harold Williams and your son David, and you've come to visit Don. That's what she said, Don. And I thought, oh, Don. You know, I mean, she was his secretary. Finally, we waited. He was preparing a general that was retiring, and he was making the preparations for it. And a few minutes later, he walks out. He walks up to me, and he looks right at the top of my head, and he says, what in heck happened to your hair, Corn Willie? That was the first thing he said to me. He was a great guy. He took us all through the point, took us where he used to box in the gymnasium. And when we got there, there was a big round glass you could look in, and you see him in there boxing and that. So he lifts David up to it so he can look through it. He said, David, what do you see in there? David says, I see two guys boxing. Well, he says, I got to tell you a story. There was a plebe here, and I hated his guts, and he hated mine. So he says, I challenged him to a boxing match. And you know, David, he says, I got one of the worst black eyes I ever got in my life. David thought that was funny. He started laughing. That was quite a day. Then he takes us down to the bakery, and of course they make all their own bakery goods, all their ice cream. All water is purified for the cadets. And he takes us over to where they're making donuts, and he says to the cook, give David a donut. So David thought that was a big deal. Then we went to the kitchen where they're cutting fillets, filet mignons. And he says, you know, twice a week they get filet mignon here at West Point. I thought, geez, I might go to West Point myself. Yeah, we had quite a day. And then he took us to the chapel. Boy, if you've never been there, you've got to see that. The chapel at West Point. Yeah. And then from there, he took us down in the tactical room, which visitors cannot go. He took us down, showed us all through it. He said, we don't allow visitors down here. He says, you're not a visitor. Well, anyway, that was a great day. And then, to top it all off, he takes us over to the, what they call sally boards. They got all the marks of there's nothing hidden. What you do there at West Point, everybody can see how you're doing on your marks. So he went up these stairs, and he says, I'll holler to you when I'm ready. He says, I got a couple of guys I want you to meet. So we went up the stairs and walked in this room, and here's these two cadets standing there saluting us. And General Bennett says to him, tell Mr. Williams and his son David, tell them what you're doing in this room. They said, well, we're the two top cadets. He said, they're out there sweating their butts off. He said, we don't have to do that. He said, we're the two top cadets here. And this is the room that General Eisenhower slept in, and we have that privilege. Well, that was quite a thing. I didn't realize that. And they were the two top cadets. But then, afterwards, before we left West Point, I asked him if I could bring my little league down, because old Jess Dugan and I were managing them. So, oh sure, he says, bring them down on the graduation day. So I said, okay. On graduation day, he was with us in the grandstand. He's telling all the kids about what's going on. He says, see that little guy out in the front? He's got that sword on his shoulder. He says, boy, when he drops that, he says, they better take off like a pendulum on a clock. It was very interesting. Boy, when they stepped off, boy, it made you proud to be American, see them guys. Boy, what a show they put on. That was an honor.
Now, some years later, Harold, you went down to visit.
Yeah, we went down to visit him at his estate, and they met us at the airport. His grandson and him met us at the airport and took us down to his estate. And after we got down there, he came with a German, what's those German vans? BMWs or something?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and she handed David, my son, the keys, and she said, we don't let Dad drive anymore. So we stayed there a few days, 3 days. One day I was visiting with him. Never forget it. First morning we got up. He goes over to the refrigerator. He opens it up. Pulls a big box of Jimmy Dean's sausage out. He says, David, he says, let's have Jimmy Dean's sausage and eggs for breakfast. David said, sure. He said, General, he says, I'm a good cook. I'll cook them for you. He did. He put those eggs in the frying pan, and the general stood right there. He says, that's it. David looked at him and said, you can't eat them like that, General. Oh, yes, he says, I can. He says, I hate the sight of scrambled eggs. He says, I have enough of them in the Army. You would not believe those eggs he ate, Ralph. Even I don't think you would eat. They looked raw. I never forgot that. But, boy, David thought that was funny. And we used to have quite a talk together while I was there. And they always left him and I alone. And like I said, he got talking over things, and I said, General, I said, you know, he said, don't call me General. He says, I'm Don. He says, we're not in the war now. I said, okay, Don. I said, you know, I have to tell you something. On D-Day, you know, if I'd have died on D-Day, I would be separated from God forever, because I really never give God much of a thought, only when I was in trouble. So I told him how I got saved and that. And finally, the only thing he said to me was, he looked at me, he says, well, Willie, he says, I guess that's the best place to be, isn't it? So I don't know what his commitment was.
You had mentioned also, Harold, that as he was reflecting.
Yeah. Well, there's more to this story. He not only reflected on the D-Day while we were there, but I remember that we got a phone call one day at my home after we'd been to visit him, and it was his daughter on the phone. And she says, Willie, says, this morning we lost Dad. He was running around the house hollering for guns and tanks. And she says, even hollering your name and other people's names. And he says he died before he got to the hospital. So she said, we would like you and your family to come to the funeral at West Point. So we did. We attended his funeral. They read his citation up. And if there was ever anyone that ought to got the Medal of Honor, it was General Donald V. Bennett, Colonel Donald V. Bennett that day. That man went up and down that beach. He put himself in danger all the time just trying to get a fighting force together. But we put him in for it. He got the next to it. He got the Distinguished Service Cross, which is next to the Medal of Honor. But we still got it in. It's still in the papers in Washington. I don't know if maybe you'll get it posthumously. I don't know. But we all signed up for him. There was no officers to sign, because all our officers either killed or wounded, so it was just enlisted men. But we saw it with our eyes, and we wrote it up and sent it in. Well, Tiefer did. Tiefer Robach, he's the one. He's pretty good at that. Yeah. I got to tell you about Tiefer before I close. Old Tiefer is a dyed-in-the-wool Civil War guy. All during our time in service, he was always fighting it with me. So one day, I had promised him that I was coming down to visit him. So one day, I got the phone rang, and I picked it up, and it was Tiefer on again. He says, Willie, he says, you know, you promised to come down and see me. He says, now, if you're not down here within a short period of time, I'm going to bring the guns up to the Mason-Dixon line, and we're going to have this out, see who won the war. I said, well, we won. Oh, he's quite a guy. He's got, what do they call that now? Dementia. And his wife is very bad, but he's slipping. Yeah. His wife's got dementia now.
And is Tiefer the only one for your outfit still
That's
alive?
all. Him and I are only two left from our craft on D-Day. Yeah.
And he's in Florida.
He's in Florida. My daughter, Sue, lives Timmins from where he is. Yeah.
Jackson.
Yeah. Jackson. Yeah, I've been down twice to see him. I might go one more time. Try to talk him out of getting out of there, selling that place, and get in where I am. You know, there's the tree is down there. His wife is real bad. She's up with a daughter now. He can't take care of her.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Williams.
Yeah,
I appreciate the interview.
Thank you.
Praise the Lord.